everyone, Dr. Alex Ritza here, downtown Toronto neurostructural chiropractor. This is Lunch and Learn episode 22, and we are talking about shifted ribs today. We are live on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm really excited for this week's Lunch and Learn. We had a new Instagram post that was out today talking about what is that pain under my shoulder blade, and there's already an incredible amount of interest. It is something that we deal with almost every single day in the practice. And we're going to talk a little bit about today a couple things. What is that pain under my shoulder blade? I'm going to tell you a really interesting case story and review that. We're going to talk about why that shoulder pain is there underneath your shoulder blade. We're going to talk about the difference between having it managed by a traditional chiropractor and myself, a neurostructural chiropractor. I'm going to give some very valuable information of what you can do to help manage it in the meantime. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what's coming up for the next couple weeks on our end. So let's get started. So I want to start today with a kind of a crazy story. So we had a patient come in last year, and we're going to call him Gary V in honor of my one of my mentors online, Gary Vaynerchuk. And so Gary came to see us. He had told us that he had this crazy chest pain, and that he had actually been in to see somebody in the emergency room the week before. 35-year-old guy, thin, relatively healthy, and he had this pain in the back for a bit, and then he started getting this really bad chest pain one day at the end of his workday, and he's like, oh, chest pain, I'm going to the hospital. So he goes into the hospital, and the doctors check him out, and right away, if you come in with chest pain in the emergency room, you're getting front of the line access. And so they do his EKG, and they do all of his testing, and they're like, man, Gary, you are normal. And Gary's like, I'm not normal. I feel like my chest is going to explode. And so the doctor did a little bit more investigating and couldn't figure out what it was, and just kind of left it at that. I just told him, Gary, you're not having a heart attack here. Have some medication, which took the edge off a little bit but didn't help. So when we saw Gary, he told us about his crazy experience. And I started probing, asking a couple questions, and I'm like, yeah, Gary, tell me a little bit of what's going on with your back. What was leading up to this? He's like, yeah, I had this pain underneath my shoulder blade for a couple of weeks, and then one day, bam, chest pain. And ask a few more questions, and we go on to our neurostructural examination, and I'm doing our advanced palpation examination. I go straight to his spine, and I push the spot. I'm like, Gary, is that your spot? And he's like, oh my God, that's my heart attack pain. And I see, yeah, exactly, it's coming from your spine. He kind of turns around and looks at me, he's like, what do you mean it's coming from my spine? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So that pain under your shoulder blade that everyone comes in and thinks that they have a tight muscle or a trigger point is almost 100% of the time actually a joint between your spine and your ribs, which we call this the costovertebral joint. And so what that means in Latin is basically rib-spine joint, or joint between the ribs and your spine. And this is a synovial joint similar to the synovial joints in your ankle, your elbow, your knee, and the vertebra. But when this synovial joint gets angry, it gets sometimes heart attack angry. And so these irritated or shifted costovertebral joints, they can produce a lot of pain, similar to the pain that you might get if there's a little shift in your spine between some of the adjacent vertebrae. And this is something that we encounter almost on a daily basis. We had a couple cases today where people's like, oh, my ribs are out, or my ribs irritated and shifted. And to be very honest, this is a very easy fix for me, for that person, in terms of getting them out of pain. A really excellent correction to the spine will almost 100% of the time get rid of that pain and that irritated joint or that problem on the day of. But I'm going to tell you why that's probably not the approach that you want to take, which might be a little shocking. So the rib joints, these are joints that form when, let's pretend that I'm the spine and these are the ribs. This is where the rib comes around and forms a joint right here with the spine. And sometimes these joints, like I said, they can get irritated and produce a lot of pain. So unlike the hip joint, which is a ball and a socket and is very stable, these rib joints are relatively unstable. They kind of sit like this. And so it's very easy for them to move and be shifted as opposed to the ball and socket shoulder joint. That came out right. So with these relatively unstable joints in terms of their actual structure, They're also relatively unstable because there's not a lot of muscles around this joint that hold it in place. So if you think about your shoulder joint, or sorry, the shoulder blade, it has about 17 or 18 muscles that hold it in place. So it's pretty stable, it's not moving anywhere. If you think about your humerus or the shoulder joint here, it has, off the top of my head, I don't know, it has a lot of muscles that attach to it, let's say 9 or 10, and it's going to hold it in place there. And because it's going to hold it in place, it's much tougher to dislocate or to irritate the shoulder joint, but we all know if you're in a good snowboarding accident, it is possible for that shoulder joint to pop out. So back to our ribs, we have a relatively unstable joint because of muscles and because of the shape. And because of that, it's very common for these rib joints to get irritated. And in the meantime, or sorry, in the moment, it usually feels like a sharp pain underneath your shoulder blade. Now, if you're like Gary and you let it go for a couple days and a couple weeks and maybe even a couple months, this is where you can start getting pain traveling away from that location underneath the shoulder blade. And if it can get really bad, it can also stimulate the nerves and feels like it's piercing through the chest or traveling around the chest wall. And so if you go to our Instagram post from today, you see the third image when you swipe over. That gives a little indication of where those ribs can show pain if they get irritated. So let's talk about now why these rib joints can get shifted and irritated and what to do about it. So let's go with the first two things. Very easy. The why these things can get irritated is, number one, is the muscles around it that hold it in place are too weak and not doing their job. So if you're living the desk life, if you're not maybe working on your core strength and going to the gym as much as you can, and the back is a little bit weak, then it's more likely for these rib joints to move and get shifted. They also only have about 3 or 4 muscles that attach onto the ribs near this: levator castorum, serratus posterior, serratus anterior, kind of, and some of the paraspinal muscles. So not a lot of muscles holding it in place. And so those muscles have to be additionally strong to keep it there. So number one, muscle weakness. Number two, and the most important thing, is your overall structure. And you can think to some extent your posture. So when we see somebody who's had an irritated rib, just like we saw this morning, their instructions when they're leaving their office is keep your shoulders back and down as much as you can. And that's going to keep your posture, number one, stacked up. That's what we're always talking about. Ears, shoulder, hip, knee, ankle, we're standing there, stacked up. And so that's going to keep you stacked up. And the other thing, it's going to also keep the rib joint in a much more stable position. And the opposite of that is where we get into trouble, where we start getting a little bit shifted and the shoulders round forward. And you can almost imagine that when the shoulders round forward, the rib joints pop out like that because the ribs have to go somewhere. And so when that rib joint goes from here to here, as a loose diagram, you can imagine that rib joint's more likely to pop out, get irritated, get shifted, and get really, really painful. So now let's compare somebody who's stacked up nice and perfect and who's shifted all the time, and their natural structure is to exist here. And I don't mean like pretending your posture is not good. I mean, this is actually how you look. And if we do your structural photos or examination, we see your head is shifted forward. You can imagine that for 12 hours of the day, that's going to be putting a lot more stress on that rib joint, even if you're practicing your posture. Because even if you're practicing your posture and you go from here to there, you're still going to have that outward bowing on the ribs, and guaranteed you're going to have a more likely chance of those rib joints getting popped out, getting shifted. I can't respond to the comments right now on Instagram. I would love to, but thank you. I'll respond later. And so way more likely for those rib joints to get irritated. Now, let's go back to what we did with Gary, because I think this is interesting. So we saw Gary because he was in an emergency or excruciating pain. Something we never, ever, ever do is we actually made a correction on his first visit because I felt so terrible for him that he needed it in order to survive his day. So we made a very small correction. Gary sits up and says, "Holy expletive, it's gone." And that's what happens with these rib joints when you make a correction to them. It's an almost instantaneous fix. But you can imagine there's a punchline coming in. So we got Gary back in for his review of results, where he went over his results. And he comes back in, same thing's going on. He says, "Doc, why is this back?" And so we go through and explain exactly what we've explained today, that if you have shifted posture, if you have some muscular weakness around the spine, if you have a core problem with your spine and nervous system, these rib joints are more likely to get shifted, and it's going to happen much more often. And so, you can go in for the traditional chiropractic, boom, one-time fix. We don't do things that way. We like to correct core problems in the spine and nervous system so that we can move people towards closer towards their most optimum health by removing core problems in the spine and nervous system. And so we improve the nervous system and we improve your structure. And when you improve the structure and when you improve the way the nervous system talks to the muscles around the rib joint, guess what? It happens a lot less often. And that's definitely the experience in our cases. Do practice members of ours still sometimes get the occasional shifted rib joint? Yeah, if you sit for 12 hours in a day, your ribs are going to get really, really irritated. But I can guarantee you that it's going to happen a little bit less often than if you're shifted forward and you have some weakness around the back. And that's where, our Move curriculum, which I encourage everyone to go download. It is fantastic for managing these type of issues with building your core strength. Everyone should go ahead and download that. So in terms of some value, I want to give a little bit today so that if anyone's experiencing this problem, before they can get in and get a proper neurostructural examination, this is what you do. So number one, you're probably going to want to ice that sucker just for pain relief. Number two, the more the shoulders are back and down, the happier that rib is going to be, the more stable it's going to be, the more stacked up you are going to be. Number three, you want to get your lacrosse ball and you want to go a little gently around that rib where it's irritated first, and then you can go in for the kill, but very, very gently. Anything more than a 2, 3, 4 out of 10, you probably want to back that off. Other than that, I think those are, and I guess another thing you could do, you get in a little bit of stretching through the rhomboids. You can combine a little rhomboid stretch with bringing the head down and moving the head up and down, back and forth. And that, very, very gently, no more than a 3 or 4 out of 10 in terms of discomfort, is a very good way to approach this when you have an acute or a sore rib joint until you can get in and get it fixed. And that's something a traditional chiropractor is really excellent for a quick fix. But if you want these things to go away, you don't want them to come back anymore, that's where I really recommend that you at least get in for a case review, get a proper neurostructural examination, see if your spine is shifted, see if there are some strength issues in the area that could be repeatedly contributing to these rib problems. That's what we do. That's what we do really, really well. And really, really enjoy seeing that and seeing people have that problem less often. And so that's where Gary, after we went over his review of results and went forward with some of his corrective care, that's where he noticed a tremendous difference. He went from having this once or twice a month to maybe once or twice a year, if that, and is, I would hope, very, very happy with the care he's receiving. So a couple of things. If you think that you repeatedly are having this problem, number one, you can go on to the link that is associated with this. You can read a little bit more, and that's going to see if you've had a shifted rib before, see what it feels like, look a bit more of the details, and then you can download our postural assessment, and that'll give you a better example if you're shifted. If you want to take the next step forward, give our office a call and we can get you scheduled in for at least a complimentary case review, and if it's necessary and you want to go forward with it, we do a neurostructural examination to figure out if you have a shifted rib and if it's something that long-term you want to fix, or if there's other health problems that you know of or think you might be related to a core problem in the spine, we help you with that. The last thing, because this is often a misdiagnosed condition, you think Gary goes to the emergency room, unfortunately that particular physician or nurse or whatever didn't know what it was. This is where we can really help somebody that we know or we love, or a colleague, or even a boss, if you should. Send this link to them, make a comment. We would really appreciate it because we can get our message out and we can help more people, and then you'll be able to help that person because they'll know how to manage it instead of having to suffer with it. So you can make a comment, direct message them. If anybody has any questions, we really want to help. Just send us a message or leave a tag of a friend, and we'll happily answer questions that they might have. Should anybody want to send us an email, again, my email is listed. I'm here to take care of you guys. Just let me know. And I think that's it for Lunch and Learn TV. I did have a little list that I wanted to check in with. Yep. We are good. Okay, so episode 22 is in the books. I hope to see everybody next week. Oh, and the last thing, we're going to have an Instagram series, like 14 posts coming out that I think are some of the best I've ever done. So stay tuned for those, and I'm really excited about them. So you guys have an amazing day, amazing weather here in Toronto. I was out for a ride this morning. It was hot, and I think it's going to be mainly an inside afternoon and then some pool time. So you guys have a great day. Love you lots, and we'll catch you next week. Bye. Mwah.